Well guys, as you can see, it is a new day today and we are working on the valve springs. I've got the OEM ones over here. This is from cylinder 1. These are your keepers and then your valve stem seals. So we replaced all of that. This is what they look like, the dual valve springs when they are installed. So now we're going to work on this one. I'm going to show you guys exactly what I'm doing with this rope in the cylinder here as well. And then you guys can kind of follow along if you haven't seen this before. What I've done so far is I have removed the spark plugs and wires from each cylinder on each bank. And basically what I'm doing is I am filling the spark plug hole with this rope here. As you guys can see, it's a pretty thin rope, but it's squishy enough that we're kind of able to stuff the cylinder with it. And then once I have it as far in there as it can go, basically I rotate the crank over so that way the piston comes up and compresses it against the valve. And once I do that, basically we can compress the valve spring, take out the keepers, remove the valve spring, and your valves are not going to fall into the cylinder. You know, I was thinking about using this guy with the air pressure. This is going to be a little bit quicker to do, but there's a little bit more risk because if you lose pressure in the cylinder and the air doesn't keep the valve up, then you run a much higher risk of dropping a valve, and I just don't want to do that. So instead, I'm going with this method just because, you know, it takes a little bit more time, but this is by far the safest option. So now that I've stuffed a good amount of this rope in here, I'm going to grab my 24mm socket here, and then I'm just going to rotate this over just a little bit at a time. You want to go kind of slow because you just don't want to, you know, push too hard with the rope on this, but you can see right here, right there is where I'm getting pressure. And I just can't push it anymore. So that's telling me that the rope is now making contact with the cylinder head and pressing up against the valves. So now here is my valve spring compressor tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to thread these in here just kind of loosely so that way I can kind of line things up. So now that it's lined up pretty good, you want to center it pretty well so that way you're not making contact with any of the springs on the side. And also that'll help you to basically push it down a little bit more straight, and then you won't have to worry about, you know, one side kind of seesawing or teeter-tottering like that. So now I'm going to get that decently tight. And now I'm just going to use this impact on a low setting to just drive it down a little bit more. And you can see there, now our keepers are loose. So what you're going to want to do is grab a magnet, and you'll just grab the keepers out like that with your magnet. And now that you have all the keepers out, now we can back this off again and pull off the valve springs. Now I'm going to pull off my valve stem seals. You want to be really careful with these not to damage your valve. So just make sure that you don't mar up the side of the valve with the teeth of the pliers or anything, and just slide these off gently. And now you're going to grab your magnet again and grab your valve seats, because we will not be reusing these for the dual valve spring setup. So now you just want to clean up this area a little bit, get all the oil, so that way you can apply some new assembly lube and just check things out to make sure that there's no damage. So now that it's clean, we want to apply just a little bit of assembly lube to where the valve seat's going to go, and then also to the valve stem where the seal is going to go, just that way we're not applying it dry, because that can damage your seal. So here's your parts and how they go together. First you have your valve seat, then you have your valve stem seal, that's going to go in like that, and then you have your dual valve spring here. This middle one does come out, so just make sure that it's situated in there properly when you put it together. So that's going to go in there. And then you have your retainer, and this is directional. So you have this middle ridge here. That's where the middle valve spring is going to go. And then you have your outer one, and that's where this is going to ride. So that goes on top of there. And as you guys can see, it fits nice and snug. And then after that, you also have your keepers. So these are going to be applied right after when you have your valve spring compressed. And we're going to use some assembly lube on the end of the valve spring just to keep these in place. That way they don't fall off, because these can be incredibly frustrating when you're trying to use your giant sausage fingers to maneuver them around the valve spring, and they just keep falling off everywhere. So I'll show you guys how I do that. And one more thing that I should mention is that you don't want to use your OEM hardware or valve stem seals with this. You want to use only the BTR stuff. And also, one thing that I noticed when I was putting these together, there is a slight gap between the valve stem seal and your seat right here. So you can see that that is the correct way to do it according to BTR. I just wanted to let you guys know that because when I first saw it, I was like, that doesn't look quite right because it's not flush, but that's how they intend to have it. So first I'm going to install my seats. Next, I'm going to put on my valve stem seals. I'm going to push them on as far as I can by hand. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a 12 millimeter socket right here and a small hammer. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tap these on really lightly and just make sure that they are completely straight because it's easy to mess these up if you're not paying attention. And you'll be able to hear the sound change when you do this. So you'll hammer it on and it kind of sounds a little bit more hollow. And once you get onto the bottom there, you'll hear kind of like a metal on metal sound. It's going to sound a lot more solid. And again, there is a gap here, so keep that in mind. And BTR does make a tool to install your valve seals, but the 12 millimeter socket fits really well on this, and I just don't see a point in buying the tool if this works just as well. So now we're going to place our valve springs on the seats. And guys, there is no top or bottom to this. These are reversible, so keep that in mind. And then you're going to place your retainers on top. And again, this is the side that should be facing the spring. So place that there. And now it's time to compress them. So all you have to do is reinstall your tool. Now that it's pretty centered, we're going to drive it back down. Now we're going to put a dab of this assembly lube on the end of our valve, and that's going to help keep the keepers in place so that way they don't fall off when we're trying to install it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place them here, and they'll kind of snug up at the base of the valve, and you'll kind of feel them fall into place. And using a pick can make this a little bit easier, but that's about how you want it to look. And now that they're both installed, we can back this off. And there we go. That's what it's going to look like once you have successfully installed your dual valve springs. I'm just going to wipe these off just to keep them clean. Again, as you guys saw on the install tool, there's a little bit of the paint flaking off and a little bit of metal flakes on there. So I'm just going to clean this up a bit just so that way we don't have any of that stuff floating around the oil. And then once we are ready to install the rocker arms, we're going to put a thin layer of assembly lube on all of these. So that way, when we start the motor, it's not going to be running dry on these for the first couple seconds. So make sure to coat any moving metal to metal parts with assembly lube. You can't use too much of this stuff. And now you're just going to repeat that for the rest of the cylinders. So I've got 6 more to go. So I'll get back with you guys once I'm done with that. Fast forward now, we have the dual valve springs installed with the new keepers, valve seats, and valve stem seals. So that looks great. I did want to mention with this tool over here, this thing did a decent job, you know, for a one-time use. It really wasn't too bad, but as you guys can see, like down here at the bottom, I ended up just putting some like assembly lube on the bottom there, just that way I wouldn't get all these metal shards in the motor. So that kind of gets torn up pretty good. I'd recommend pretty much replacing that washer with each use. This job, just to do the valve springs and all that, took me about 3 hours. Again, doing the rope method with bringing the piston up to the top of its stroke, it does take quite a bit longer. And I really didn't want to mess that up, so I took my time, I took breaks, all that stuff. So again, 3 hours, it's probably the most tedious part of this entire job. But now we're going to move on to the front here, and we're going to install the cam. All right, here's the new cam, guys. So really, to get it ready to put in the car, all I'm going to do is apply some more of this assembly lube. So I'm going to make sure I get a little bit on every lobe, just that way when it starts up, it's not going to be running dry. You never want that. So I'm pretty much just going to run this all the way along it. probably 2 passes there. And then basically just smear it around, and then we're going to install it. All right, that looks good to me. Time to install it in the car. Now that the cam is installed, we can pull out our dowels. So we're just going to want to be nice and easy with these and pull it out. Now that the dowels are out, I also cleaned up the surface behind here, and then I just put this one bolt in for the cam retainer plate. I'm going to show you guys. I'm also installing this timing chain dampener and then the dampener bracket. So because I have a 1999 C5 Corvette, it does not have the bolt holes from the factory to take one of these dampeners. So I needed to buy this from Melling, and it's basically just an adapter bracket. So you're going to use the bottom 3 holes from your cam retaining plate to bolt this up. These are all 18 foot-pounds as the torque spec. And basically, from Melling, you're going to have to push these bushings out because how this is going to go on there, it's going to slide onto these 2 posts here. And then you're going to use these bolts to bolt it up, and then these to bolt it up to the other plate. So I'm going to push these out real quick, and I'll show you guys how to install it. So this is just what I'm doing here. There's the socket. I'm just using this crescent wrench just as a place to push on both sides, so that way the bushing can pop out kind of where the jaws are in the middle. So once you kind of pop it initially, then it's really easy to push it out the rest of the way, so you can just do that by hand. So this stuff over here is all the stuff that we are not going to use in this kit for the LS1. So at this point, now you can just take this, place it over the top there, and it fits nice and snug. And then you'll grab these. These are a 5mm hex, and just screw them in. You'll want to do that on both sides. So I was incorrect here. These ones are all 18 foot-pounds. These 2 bolts are going to be Guten tight, I guess. There's not really a spec on those, so I'm just going to tighten them up with a 1/4-inch drive, and then I'm going to put some of this blue thread locker on each of these bolts, just that way they don't come loose, because that would be pretty catastrophic if that happened. So we're going to try to avoid that. So again, we're going to put some thread locker on these ones as well, because we don't want these ones coming loose either. Oh, and don't forget to tighten this guy and apply blue thread locker. Now it's time to get the cam gear back on and replace the timing chain. I got this IWIS timing chain, which is supposed to be pretty stout. This is an upgrade over the OEM chain, so hopefully we won't have any stretching issues or anything like that. So we're going to take this guy off, toss that in the trash somewhere, and we'll get this one put on, and we'll make sure to line up the timing marks just as we had before. Make sure to use a little bit of blue thread locker on these guys as well. I don't know about you guys, but those 2 dots look pretty lined up to me. So now we are going to torque these guys to 26 foot-pounds and then do another 1/4 turn is what they call for. A lot of you guys are going to yell at me in the comments. I know it. I reused these bolts because I didn't have any in the kit. They didn't come with any. So we're going to send it. I'm probably not going to do a full 1/4 turn with this, just because if they've already been torqued to yield, I don't really want to stretch them out anymore. So I just put some Loctite in there. I think they'll be all right. So now moving on to the oil pump. Here's the OEM pump, and here is the new Melling pump. So I have the Melling 10295. This is their high pressure oil pump, and it's made in the USA, not Canada. Let's go. The more American parts on this car, the better. So this is the old O-ring that came from this pump. I'm not really sure what color this is exactly, maybe like a brown, but I'm colorblind, so don't listen to me. So there's 2 O-rings that come with the Melling kit. There's a green one and a black one, And in this instruction sheet here, it says for the green one, you're going to want to use that if you have either kind of like a tapered end or a grooved end. So you'll measure this with a set of calipers. 0.84 is what this inner one is, and 0.87 inches is what this outer one is. This tapered one, again, 0.84 and then 0.87. You'll know if it's tapered when you use some calipers. You'll basically see this number change from 0.84 to 0.87. So when I checked mine, from the front to the back, it's 0.87 continuously. So that matches up with figure 2 here, which shows the straight end. That's 0.87 inches approximately from front to back. So that calls for the black O-ring to be used. I also wanted to do a sanity check because there's a lot of confusion on this online. I wanted to do a sanity check. This one should be slightly smaller just because it's been compressed. So you look at this one, and it looks pretty darn close to the black one. Also, another thing that I should mention is that here is where you can replace your spring if you wanted to replace a spring in this. So there is 3 springs with this kit. The one that comes installed is the red spring. That's going to be your high pressure standard volume spring. There's also a blue spring, and then there's a gray spring. Those ones are just if you wanted to change to like standard pressure or use the Copo spring is what it's called. They just basically have different pressures for this pump. So we're just going to stick with the red spring in here. I don't see any problem with that. I wanted to use the slightly higher pressure one anyways. That's why I got this. So we're going to leave that alone. We'll install the black O-ring on the pickup tube, and then we'll torque the bolts for this to 18 foot-pounds. So now, according to the instruction manual from Melling, the next thing that you want to do is you want to have these slightly loose. You want to snug them up by hand, but don't tighten them too much. And then you want to spin the motor over a couple times, so that way the oil pump kind of self-centers. Obviously, it's keyed on the crank to some extent, but basically the holes on these are just a little wallowed out, so that way you have a little bit of movement kind of side to side and up and down. So by doing this, you're going to center it a little bit better, and then you can torque these down to 18 foot-pounds, and these are 10 millimeter. I also used blue Loctite on these as well, just to give them a little extra grip. And for the pickup tube, that is a 10 millimeter. I just snugged that up as best as I could with a ratcheting wrench. When you're getting this pickup tube into that hole there, I kind of used just a flathead screwdriver to pry on the other side, just a little bit. You got to be careful because the oil pan's right there. You don't want to scratch that up. But basically, I just aided because there's only one bolt here, and so it kind of wants to go in a little crooked. So you kind of want to just guide the other side up as you are tightening it. Make sure that you also lube up that oil or the O-ring as well, because you don't want that going in dry. That can damage it. Now that the cam is installed and the motor is timed, we're going to install the push rods and rocker arms. I like to do this with the timing cover off, so that way if there is a timing issue when you turn it over by hand, you can easily address that. So again, just personal preference of kind of like when you do this. Some people just do this part at the end, but for me, I'd rather do it when the timing cover's off. With the push rods, before I install these, I like to roll them on a flat surface just to make sure that they are completely straight. There have been instances I've seen where people have installed them and they're bent and it causes a whole lot of issues. So it's just better to check before you install them. So now I'm going to get a little bit of this assembly lube on my finger and dab up each end of this, just so that way nothing's getting installed dry. And then we can put them in each hole. Just drop them in. And we'll do that with every single one of these on both sides. Now it's time to install our rocker arms. So I got these with the trunnion upgrades already installed, so that way I don't have to worry about the needle bearing failure anymore. I got these from Michigan Motorsports, and it also came with the hardware that I need. Here's the OEM rocker arms. So we're still going to use this rail here, but I'm just going to pull off all the OEM rocker arms and the hardware and replace them with the new ones and the new hardware. So with your rocker arms, again, you're going to want to use some assembly lube. So I'm going to put some assembly lube in here in this channel, and then I'm also going to put some on this surface here where it meets the push rod, and then on this surface here where it meets your valve spring. So now I'm going to install all of these and tighten them by hand on this side and on the other bank, and then after that we're going to come back around and torque them to spec. Now that all the rocker arms are installed finger tight, I'm going to go through with a torque wrench and I'm going to set them all to 22 foot-pounds. Basically, after I'm done torquing them to 22 foot-pounds, I'm going to rotate this over twice, re-torque them, and then rotate it again and torque them again. Basically what this does is it just makes sure that all of your valves come up all the way when you torque them at some point. Just that way you're not getting any weird torques because of the pivoting of the rocker arm. This can kind of mess with your torque specs sometimes. So I'm just going to run through that, and then I'll get back with you guys once I'm finished. When you're torquing these to spec, make sure that all of the rocker arms are centered on your valve. And then also, when you are turning over the crank, just make sure that all of your spark plugs are out on both sides because it makes it a whole lot easier to spin the crank. Before moving on, I want to let you guys know that if you're finding this video helpful, make sure to help me out as well and subscribe to Mile High Misfits because that is the best way to support the channel. But without further ado, let's get back into it. Now it's time to install our valve covers. I've got some new valve cover gaskets over here as well. So we're going to install those and slap them on top, and then we can start putting the front of the motor back together. So now I've cleaned off the valve covers. I put on the new gaskets, all that stuff. They look pretty good. One thing that I do want to mention is with these, when you're installing these, it makes it a whole lot easier if you grab a pick, kind of like this guy, and then when you're trying to pull these guys off here, they can get pretty tight, and obviously they're a little bit old. So I usually just stick it through the back here, kind of poke it through the front, and then just leverage it off like that, and you see it just pops right off. So you don't really want to fight these guys. They're super frustrating. So just, use a pick, dry these off a little bit, kind of clean it up, and then to put on the new ones, just get a little bit of oil on this edge here, just to make it a little bit easier, and then when you go to pop this guy on, usually with the oil, it kind of slides on a little bit better, but they are kind of a pain. You just want to be careful not to rip them, because if you install them dry, they can rip. So once you have it like this, just pop it into the valve cover, and then you can basically, once it sticks through like that, you can kind of pull on this end and pop it right in. Well, here's a little Easter egg for you guys. So with the BTR trunnion upgrade rocker arms that they sell on their website, they do not fit with the passenger side valve cover. So the driver side valve cover fits just fine, no clearance issues at all. However, with this one, you see it has these two plastic baffles in it, and these rocker arms are slightly beefier than the stock ones. So what you'll see is that when you try to line these up, it's kind of hard to show you guys, but you can see right there, because of the trunnion upgrades, it does not clear that. So I did a little bit of research, and it was kind of hard to find some good information on this. But so it turns out this is only an issue with the early model LSs. So my guess is that if you have a 2001 and up, your valve covers are going to look a little bit different, and that's going to save your ass on this. But if you have an older version like mine, basically what you have to do is you have to remove these plastic baffles. They're held in by these little posts here. And so basically I'm just gonna pull and break off these baffles. But basically you'll see that with your PCV system, you're gonna have probably some oil sucking up into there because of that. So although this isn't a huge deal, I mean, I'm not really super worried about it, but if you get rid of these baffles, you are gonna have a little bit more oil get into these guys. So keep that in mind. I'm sure that there are better options out there. You might be able to get new valve covers. Or if you go with the OEM style rockers and you just do the trunnion upgrade yourself, you can save some money, and also you don't have to remove these. So that's what I found out. I learned that lesson the hard way. I wanted to save myself a little bit of effort by just getting the pre-installed ones and spend a little bit more money. And yeah, these guys are beefier. So as far as rigidity and structural strength, they're going to be a little bit better than OEM, which is great. But because of that, yeah, they're a little bit more expensive, and I do have to get rid of these. So ooh, that one came out really nice and easy. Look at that. Well, learn from my mistakes, guys. I was pulling the front main seal out of this timing cover here, and I was prying on this back lip here a little bit because it was pretty stuck in there, and I was hammering it from the back, but I still couldn't get it, so I just put a screwdriver in there and started prying it, and that's what happens when you do that. Yeah, it cracked this back wall, so now this thing is trash. So I ended up going to Advance Auto Parts, and I found one for $100. So I lucked out there, so I don't have to stop the project for a week while I wait for shipping. So that's good. It also comes with the front main seal already installed. It comes with the timing cover, and then it also comes with these two water pump gaskets. And I'm really happy about that because these ones that I got from Michigan Motorsports, these ones aren't bad. But when I got them in shipping, you can see they're a little bent. And I hadn't noticed that until now. So what's nice is that these ones are completely straight. So I think I'm going to use these gaskets instead because I think these ones are going to leak. Even if I try to straighten them out, they're probably just not going to be as good as they would have been. So we'll leave those over there. But yeah, I will be using these. So that's really good. The only problem with this is that because this main seal is already installed, I can't use the Mr. Gasket timing cover alignment tool because this is supposed to go into the timing cover without the main seal, right? So you can see right there, obviously not going to fit in there. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to run a bead of the gasket maker here, just that way this seals to the oil pan, and then I'll do kind of the edges as well. I'll put the timing cover gasket behind it, and then while I install them, I'm going to put it on to my new harmonic balancer. And I'll use basically the harmonic balancer to center the timing cover. So I'll leave all the bolts loose. I'll put the timing cover on with the harmonic balancer being pressed on there using this tool. And then once that's set, then I will tighten down all the bolts, and that should give me a pretty good alignment as long as I just make sure that there's no weird torques on it or anything like that. So yeah, unfortunately I won't be able to use my $50 Mr. Gasket tool because I've heard this thing works really well, but oh well, I guess we'll see. Hopefully I don't have any leaks. I just cleaned off the timing cover mating surface, so that's step number 1. Now I'm going to put a bead of this ultra black on the bottom of the timing cover here, so that way it seals better to the oil pan. And then after that, I'm going to install the timing cover and the timing cover gasket. I'm just going to loosely bolt those on, just so that way when I install the harmonic balancer, I can center it up. So I'm going to press on the harmonic balancer using this tool here. This is the install tool. If you don't have the install tool, you can put it in the oven. It says here, let's see, max 250 degrees Fahrenheit is what you'd put it at. And that will kind of open up the bore of the harmonic balancer. So that way you can kind of snug it on there a little bit easier, tap it on with a hammer if you need to, if you just don't have the tool handy. And then after that, basically I'm going to center the timing cover up on the harmonic balancer. So I'm then going to tighten all the bolts up once it's centered to 18 foot-pounds. And when you do that, you want to start with these bottom two bolts here. So tighten these to 18 foot-pounds, and then you'll kind of want to work from the center and kind of go up and down, tightening everything to 18 foot-pounds. And I'm going to use my old timing cover for demonstration purposes, but if you are using the Mr. Gasket install tool, you basically just push that into there, and you'll see the O-ring in there kind of rides on this race here. So push that in, and then you'll use this. This will just go over your crank snout. You'll push it on, and then kind of center it up, and then you'll tighten everything down to spec. And then you can install the front main seal, and then you can install your harmonic balancer after that. Make sure to put some oil on the crank snout, and then your and your front main seal as well. Now that the timing cover is centered and torqued down, and the harmonic balancer is pushed in just about as much as I can get it, you want to put in your old harmonic balancer bolt, and you want to torque this to 240 foot-pounds. To do this, if you have a manual transmission car, you can just put it in 6th gear. And if you have an automatic, you'll need something to hold this in place so that way the motor doesn't turn over. Yeah. There we go. So now that the old bolt is in there at 240 foot-pounds, now you're going to get your new bolt, and the new bolt is going to get tightened to 37 foot-pounds, and then you're going to rotate it an additional 140 degrees, and these are torque to yield bolts, so you don't want to reuse these. Before installing the crank bolt, I'm going to be pinning the crank. So as you guys can see, I have a jig here that has holes on each side. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to be drilling into each one of those holes, and that's going to drill half of the harmonic balancer and then half of the crank snout, and then I'm going to be pressing a pin into each one. What that does is that keeps the harmonic balancer from spinning on the crank because the crank isn't keyed from the factory. And usually this is better for higher horsepower applications, but I'm just kind of future-proofing this car right now. I'd rather just do it so that way I don't have to do it later down the road if I want to do a supercharger or something like that. So at this point, now I need to drill into those holes. Also, that jig has that bolt that goes through it, and it is a 14mm hex. So you'll want to have one of those handy if you get that kit. And then, so after I drill it, then I'm going to press the pins in. So I drilled each one of these holes about 1.9 inches. So that should be enough. These are about 1 inch each. And then this is about 0.9 inches, just about. So I wanted to be a little extra cautious. So I went just a little bit further, just because if these are sticking out, your bolt won't sit flush. So you want to make sure that these are flush or inset just slightly. So now it's time to take the jig off, and I can press these into place. Yep, that's pretty much right on the money. So I was wrong, actually. These are not a press fit. They actually just slide right into the holes, and then they're going to be captured by the bolt. So now we're going to install our AC belt, and it just gets routed basically from here, under, over, and then over this guy, and then under. Just like that. Now I'm going to install the water pump. So I cleaned my mating surfaces and put on my gaskets. This is the easiest way to do it. Put your bolts through place the gaskets on there so that way you make sure they're in the correct orientation when you install the pump. And then I also cleaned the mating surfaces on the block side. So now I'm just going to set it on there, thread in the bolts, finger tight, and then we're going to go on the torque sequence. I'll show you how to do that as well. Now that the water pump's in place, we're going to come through and torque all of these to 11 foot-pounds, and then we're going to go back through and torque them again to 22 foot-pounds. So we'll start kind of in the middle, go across, and we'll kind of go in a zigzag pattern, so that way we make sure that it all tightens down evenly. There we go, all cleaned up, torqued down, and I also reconnected these hoses as well. Next up is the alternator. And I'm not using a spec for these guys, I just snugged them up. I honestly forgot about my spark plugs. You don't want anything falling in those holes, so it's best to install these now. Now make sure that you put the spark plugs in the same cylinders that they came out of, and these get torqued down to 11 foot-pounds. And after torquing down your spark plugs, make sure to reconnect your spark plug wires and install your boots. Now that all the plugs and wires are reinstalled, now let's reinstall our coil packs. It's time to install the serpentine belt, so here's the diagram for that. It's time for the fun part. Now it's time to put the power steering rack back in. Just like before, we're going to lower the subframe just a little bit by undoing the front and back bolts just a little bit, and then we are going to snake in the power steering rack through this hole and then connect it on the ends here. So I reinstalled these two lines here just because they're easier to get to now. And now that we're past that little area there, it shouldn't cause too much of a problem. So now I'm hoping that I can just kind of rotate it a little bit and slide it in from there. So we'll see. As you guys can see, it's made a huge mess. I'm so happy that I spent all that time cleaning my subframe because it was so worth it. There's just no way around it, guys. Getting the rack in and out is just a bear. Like, there's no way to make that any easier. It's just a bitch the entire time, and it sucks, and it's messy. Even if you do all the cleaning, and you try to make sure it's empty, and you try to do everything you can, it's always going to be an absolute bitch. So, at least it's in now. Now I just have to hook up the lines and then the ends. And now, at this point, now we got to get the cooler on after that. I straightened out some of the fins because there's a lot of bent ones, and then I cleaned it out with a power washer as well. So hopefully she'll hold on for a little bit longer. I know it was a little bit leaky, so I might replace this down the road, but for now, we'll slap her back in, let her ride. These sway bar end links are beyond clapped, but I'll just replace them later. Next is the radiator and fans. At this point, I have the radiator installed. I put on this cap here. I also connected all of my radiator hoses. And then at the bottom here, you can see I also went ahead and plugged in the fans. So the plugs for those are right under here, you can see. And then I also reattached all these clips. Got the hoses on, hose clamps. And then I also got all the electrical connections for the air intake here. So now, at this point, we have all of the new parts installed and everything's put back together. So now, it's time to start putting fluids in the car. So I've got some coolant here, power steering fluid, now I've got some oil, as well as a new drain plug and oil filter. Now that the fluids are topped off, I'm going to move on to the next part, which is priming the oil pump. So you want to take out fuse number 13 here. That's for the fuel pump. So it is this guy right here. I'm going to take out that fuse. And then I'm also going to remove all of the spark plugs again. I know, kind of a pain that you got to do that again. But then at that point, we're going to crank the motor over for about 30 seconds. Just that way the motor builds up some oil pressure, because you don't want to start this motor dry. Well, as you guys could see, we had a successful first start and everything sounds and runs great. And also, no leaks on the floor. We love to see that. So I let this thing warm up to operating temperature just to make sure that we heat cycle all the new components. So next step here is to throw the wheels back on and then the hood, obviously. And I got to get it tuned. So that's going to be the next video. So make sure to stay tuned for that. But that's all for this week, guys. If you enjoyed the content for today, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future content. I'll catch you guys next week. Later.